Welcome back. I am Jessica Hover.
I'm Layne Deyling Cherland, and this is Very Good Enough, a podcast from Very Good Mothers Club.
And that was a really beautiful call.
Yeah, we just had the loveliest conversation.
Oh my gosh. And she's amazing. Nafeesah.
Yes.
Nafeesah.
Dr. Nafeesah Allen was our guest this week. We had her on ostensibly to talk about interfaith families and questions around that, which we very much did. But also this conversation branched into a ton of places. Like I had to really control myself to be like, stay a little on topic because I had so many questions for her.
Yeah. So many. And at the end, I mean, now we're here and we're like, we could talk to her about this. We could talk to her about that. She does something very well that Layne and I really aspire to do on this podcast, which is allow space for many ideas and cultures and viewpoints and worldviews to exist and exist like respectfully and kindly. And even this podcast episode was like a big one for us because what you just said is, you remember when we were starting the podcast and we were talking about, are we going to do this? I specifically was like, I want to stay away from some certain topics, religion and politics being like big ones.
The classics.
Yeah. But we've decided to go into this more, and it really has to do with a value of mine personally that we share, but specifically when it comes to Very Good Mothers Club, I want this to be a space that people come to who don't agree with each other on plenty of things, but their love for their kids and the many, many things that they have in common are enough for them to have a relationship of some kind that is awesome. And so, yeah, we decided to do this episode.
Yeah.
What was your thought going into it?
Well, it's a thing that it just kept coming up. We've been doing this for coming up on a year actually, and having all these conversations with moms. And as much as we had agreed, like, let's just, keep some of the hotter things private because, there's so much else to cover.
Right.
Realistically, that's one of the pain points that kept being brought forward in conversations was like, either I have a different faith from my in-laws and that's really tense, and my mother-in-law says all these things and I don't know how to handle that or move forward, or my husband and I have different faiths from one another and we're just trying to navigate how we're going to talk to our kids and how we're going to explain that there are differences. I love what I believe and I love what he believes, and that's great, but we're trying to figure out how to not merge those, but how to let them go together in this space. Or we don't have a faith value, but our families do, and we want our child to be able to choose their own path, but there's this outside influence.
Yeah, or we started as the same, but then one of us changed their faith view.
Yeah.
How do we do this now?
Yeah.
So tricky.
Yeah. And these are just real conversations that kept coming up, and they're very pertinent to my life, as we've discussed.
Right.
So it just felt that circle felt very complete to me of like, okay, let's find a way that doesn't require oversharing or speculation or anything on either of our parts. Let's bring somebody in who knows how to take a lot of ideas from a lot of places and kind of come down under those ideas and talk about the value beneath.
Yeah.
So Nafeesah is someone she's a career diplomat. She's a multicultural expert. She's a communication strategist. So she's just like really uniquely positioned. I found her through a very beautiful article that she wrote about interfaith families, and then discovered like, oh, this person has exactly the skill set that I'm looking for. Yeah. So we brought her in to go ahead and walk us through kind of the principles of navigating some stuff like that.
Totally. And what we have discovered in ourselves as we've gone on is sort of like more and more, what do we believe personally, which was a conversation like upon arriving to friendship. It's we, as you can tell, we go deep fast.
Yes. The first conversation was 3 hours on Jessica's bed. We made content and then just kept talking. A lot about faith and family and marriages and all that stuff.
Totally. And we don't believe all of the same things. And yet we also are both like, here's what I believe right now based on the information I have right now.
Yeah.
Very open-minded, very respectful of like, what's your experience? Almost this thing of like understanding that the way the room looks from where Layne is sitting is literally different from the way the room looks where I am sitting. So then if we take that further, the way the world looks inside of her experience is different than mine, very different.
Yes.
And so we have these beliefs about our faith, about the world, about the way things work and the way they should work, or what would be great or what isn't working. And as friends and as leaders of this community that we're building here in this podcast is like, how do we do this alongside you, knowing that all we can give is our best, and all we can give is what we've learned up until this point in our life and what we have chosen to believe up until this point. And I don't know. I think my background, I grew up in a home that was divorced home, and then the like homes created after that with step families. My dad married a Korean woman, and they lived in Korea for much of my childhood. And then my mom was a lesbian. She was with my other mom. They were not legally married because you couldn't be that, but we did like a whole union. And the political views were different. The faith views were different. My dad grew up in a really strong, strict Mormon family that then he was no longer allowed to be in around the age of 18. Some stuff went down, and it was sort of I've said this, and people have been like, no, that's not how it works. He wasn't like excommunicated. But if we talk to him about his experience, what I understand it to be is like a social, you're not welcome here, even if like the faith, he was still welcome.
Sure.
So basically what we've got is a lot of views on God. My other mom, so not my biological mom and not my legally stepmom, she was always my other mom. She's still in my life. I'm very close to her actually. Grew up Catholic and then was no longer Catholic. And I've got lesbian aunts. So like homosexuality is something that I grew up with since I was super young. And the reason why I bring that up is because that wasn't allowed, and the way the world looked back then was a lot different than right now. So there were a lot of moving pieces, and anytime I was going from one home to the other home, the culture in the home, literally the culture, because one home was a Korean culture, the cultures in the home, the political views, the faith views, the language, just the way of seeing the world, it was all very different. And I think I appreciate now kind of having to learn like you can be okay in all of these things. And it can be okay that I don't know what I think about all of it, but I know that I love the people involved.
Yeah.
And I know that I want to maintain relationship as I grow and as I decide what I believe about certain things, even if my belief is different than this other person's belief, who I love dearly, I want to maintain relationship. Then I added a husband to the mix with his parents and their worldview looking very different from some of my growing up life. All of it's been this kind of dance of like, how do I maintain relationship? Because I actually really enjoy these people.
Yeah.
So what I'm not describing is like being a pushover and like, oh, I have to exist with all of these people because that's the right thing. No, I actually really want to be in relationship with people, and all of these different people close to me, we see things from a bunch of different perspectives.
Yeah.
And I like it. And I think that as we go forward in the world, the more you interact with people different from you, the more you realize how much you have in common and how rich life can be if you find those commonalities and choose relationship over all the other stuff we could like stand on and be like, no, it's like this, right?
Yeah.
So, so I really like this episode for that. I see a commonality there where she grew up with some of her own tensions and the way she speaks about all of this stuff. It's so refreshing.
It's so refreshing. There's so much power. And I say this at the end of the episode, but there's just like so much personal power that Nafeesah is demonstrating in what she's saying, even when she's not saying, this is me standing in my personal power and drawing a boundary. I feel that the example of what she's describing is so grounded and so centered in like what belongs to her and what is hers to protect, and the way that she invites other people into that. It's very beautiful.
Yeah. This stuff is so messy. And she brings up like, no, this is messy. No, I'm in it. It's messy. It's messy. It's messy. She doesn't speak like it's messy.
No,
she's very good.
But she says it's messy, and we believe her.
And we believe her. And we believe her because we're living in our own messy dynamics of figuring out what we believe and living alongside other people who are doing the same thing. And you don't always land in the same place.
Yeah.
And it's very hard. And especially in like marriage, Sean and I have been married 14 years now. There have been stages of marriage where we've been like, wait, so what do we think about this? And we started in this way and now we're over here. And like, where are we and what do we think and what happens when he's way over there in his thoughts and I'm way over here, but we still want to be next to each other in love.
Yes.
How do you navigate that? And we've now overcome different stages that were really hard, in times where I was like, okay, so are we going to land in the same spot? Like, how do you know? But then over time, we've just grown together and kept choosing each other. And yeah, I don't know. I don't have any like super encouragement other than it is hard stuff to figure out what you believe alongside the people you care most about. And if it feels hard to you, good job. You're in it and you're doing it. And I don't know. That is life.
That is life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we hope this is nourishing. I know this is going to be nourishing, and I'm so excited for you to have it. And we'll see you guys in the outro.
Your lip color looks perfect on you.
Oh,
it looks so good. I love it.
It's like the best I can do for like makeup. So I'm always like, I hope this lip is lipping because that's all I got.
Would say that lip is lipping this morning.
And where are you? Are we recording? Like,
we're recording. Jump right in.
Where are you based out of right now?
I live in Maputo, Mozambique. So I am on a completely different time zone. It's night. It's 7:00 here. So
oh my gosh.
How was your day then?
Yeah. It was crazy. It was the first day touring my son's new school. And I'm excited for him. It was overwhelming for me. He's 5. And so it's his first like big boy school. And it was like, oh my God. All I could think was like all the supplies I don't have that I've got to spend the weekend getting, because I didn't think about that. But he's going to have a blast on Monday. It's going to be great. It's going to be
That's
great.
amazing. And how many kids do you have?
So I have a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and I'm pregnant now. I'm due in October. So we are, lots of kids happening in our lives.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
What about you guys?
I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old and an almost 3-year-old.
Oh my gosh,
but school is starting for us next week. And I definitely remember the feeling of like, oh my gosh, this is a big transition. And when we lived in Spain for a couple of years, and my daughter was going to preschool there, and I was still learning Spanish, and they did the school tour in Spanish. And it was like the amount that was happening inside of my head was so much. And I'm like, well, hopefully she has a great time. And she did. Thankfully, it all was smooth. But that is a lot.
Yeah. What about you, Jess?
I'm Layne, and I don't have any kids.
Oh, sorry.
Not at all. My background is early childhood education, so that's kind of where we come from, our different angles that way, and try to bring it all together.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now it's hectic in this moment. I was talking to a friend who's in LA, and she was like, I'm thinking about having kids, and we're trying to be bi-coastal, and it sounds overwhelming, but you're like leading the way. I was like, girl, it's messy. Like, don't, I was like, it's messy. It takes longer than you think. Like, I don't know if I'm like the right example here, but you just kind of stay fast and loose and just go with it. So the kids always manage. That's the thing. They always have a great time. Yeah.
And so you are in Mozambique. When I was looking you up, you were in Peru. Like, what's your life look like? Where are you and why are you in all of these places?
Yeah. So I'm a career diplomat. So I work for the Department of State, and we move every 2 to 3 years, give or take. And this year was just sort of like a moving year. So we started school. Actually, the kids started school last year in Peru and did Spanish school, and it was like right down the street, and it was super easy, and it was like, oh my God, it was just awesome. And then we left Peru in May, went to the States for what was supposed to be vacation, but I don't know how you guys do it in America. Like I'm like I cannot move back. Like my brain was just like, this does not work. It was just overwhelming, and like no childcare and lots of family around, but just not childcare. And then we went to Portugal for a little bit, and then came here. So we've been here for about a month. and are settling in here. And then we'll go to South Africa in about a month for the baby because we're going to deliver in South Africa.
Okay.
And then hopefully before Christmas, we will be in Mozambique again and like settled properly. So 5 countries, 1 year.
Wow.
Hot mess, but we're just going to go with it.
And where are you from originally?
I'm from New Jersey. So
Okay.
my family's all in Newark, New Jersey, but we kind of stay between New Jersey and DC, kind of that like corridor.
How amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's so helpful to just get to like wrap a little bit more understanding around who you are and what you're looking like right now. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to catch my breath thinking about what you're describing.
Everything you're going through. Yeah. So just so you know who you're talking to beyond Layne and I, which we can introduce ourselves, but the listeners of this podcast are parents, primarily mothers of young kids. What we find is that the kids tend to be around the ages of my own kids, so like 8 and under. A lot of toddler parents, they come for a lot of what Layne brings is guidance to the toddler parents. So just as we speak, we'll be kind of filtering questions that people have sent to us that we would love to present to you and get your wisdom on. The way we found you was through a really brilliant article that Layne found.
Yeah, I was really looking.
Is this one on the religion one?
Yes. So I came across your article, and I think it was Very Well Family about bridging like a mixture of faiths within the family unit. And we've had a lot of questions in our community around faith and navigating that, and especially navigating differences, whether that's within like the nuclear family unit or particularly like feeling confident there, but then communicating with external family members. And then also some folks who are transitioning in their faith and trying to figure out like, how do I represent myself well to my family, to my partner? What do I tell these kids as things change for me, or as I want them to make their own choices, but there are influences from both sides of our family. So those are the kinds of things I was looking for. And then looking into your work, like finding you through this article and then coming to discover that you have this skill in diplomacy and multicultural expertise and communication strategy. Like what a nexus of wisdom to draw from. So that's kind of
and our listeners are or rather our online community. So we have an online community where we lead Zoom calls weekly, and they're based in the States, Canada, Australia, and Europe primarily. So just so you know who you're talking to, and some of them have cross-cultural relationships or like are raising bilingual children. So a lot of what you are navigating, I mean, it sounds like you're in the deep end of the things that maybe some of my people are in the more shallow end trying to figure out.
Awesome. I hope that I have some wisdom to contribute. I feel like I've been like flying by the seat of my pants, but I'll try to make it sound a little bit more eloquent than that.
No, that's good. Then it'll be relatable because that's what we all feel.
Maybe we could actually just start with your own life then, if we could use that as a jumping off point.
Sure. Do you want me to just like launch right in?
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, which is a really major city outside of New York, but one of those like satellite cities. So I feel like it's always been super multicultural, but it's also very segregated. So there's like a part of town where it's like much more for people who are like New York City commuters. And then there's also like people who've like grown up there and kind of like multiple generations there. And then there's an entire area of it with like lots of Portuguese and Spanish speakers and like lots of new immigrants. And they're pretty divided, but like, like there are places where everyone kind of comes together. And so I feel like as a kid, I have grown up in the orbit of lots of different people that I was trying to understand how to navigate and what to do and how to talk to different groups of people in the same space. And that kind of just grew for me like a natural curiosity about like the world and where everyone's actually from and like what are their backgrounds, whatever would bring them to this city. And now, I've sort of gone into like migration scholarship and diplomacy and lots of other things, but I think it all just kind of started from growing up in a place that was extremely multicultural and trying to understand like how, as a very young person, like how do you connect with all these different people from different backgrounds? My parents converted to Islam when they were young. So I guess they were probably, there's like debate around who converted first.
Sure.
But but I think probably like end of high school, beginning of college. I think a lot of that was because of the political moment at the time. So some of it was religious, of course, but a lot of it was just sort of just trying to understand like Black identity and like what does that mean in America at the time. And their parents were Christian from the South, so I'm part of that Great Migration story. And on both sides of their family now, there's a mix of Christians and Muslims. So I kind of grew up toggling between both, like Christmas with the grandparents and then like masjid with the aunts and uncles. And so like we've just, again, just kind of growing up in a place where lots of cultures collide and trying to like navigate that from a really young age, but also not knowing that other people don't have to navigate it. So it was really only in high school that I was like, oh, like you just have Christmas? Like what? Like you don't ever have to do anything else? Oh, that sounds convenient. Like, oh, okay. That's easy. And then just kind of grew into like a career around it. I think kind of leading into it, just being like, this is my norm, and realizing a lot of people didn't know how to navigate those different experiences, and I just kind of naturally did. So that's kind of like my story. I'm a mom of 2.5 now, I guess, if you count the one in my belly. So 5-year-old to 4-year-old. My husband's originally from Mozambique, which is where we live now, but we met in India. And so it's just been a lot of ping ponging across the world, across cultures, and like being okay with that.
That's amazing. And so you were in India. Like, how long has your life been this international, where you're going from country to country?
Yeah, so I did a study abroad in high school. So I went to a New England boarding school for high school. And then my junior year of boarding school, I ended up going to school year abroad in Spain. And that was my first real like international immersion experience. I spoke very little Spanish. I was very confused as to why they took me at all. But then by the end, I was like the most fluent speaker. And so it was like really great. And it was an American school, but immersion. And then after that, like for college, I went to college in New York. So I went to Barnard College and actually kind of stayed close to New York at that time. I just felt like I wanted to be closer to my parents, and just, New York is kind of a, its own playground. So you kind of don't feel like you have to travel to experience new cultures. But during that time, I applied for a fellowship with the State Department, which is called the Pickering Fellowship, and happened to get it. And that basically set me on this trajectory from like, I guess I knew maybe like my junior year of undergrad that I was going to become a diplomat. So over the course of graduate school and all of that was kind of like preparing for this international life. So every summer we go to a different place and like intern someplace different. And then eventually I like officially joined in 2009. And that's kind of where most of my like longer stints of travel have really come. And I've grown my family and like found my partner from this like career journey too. So a lot of it is like attached to where I was working at the time. But so really since 2009 in earnest. But back in junior year of high school is kind of where it started.
That is incredible.
That's amazing.
And where did you have your babies, the first two?
My first one I had in Virginia. We were like between assignments, so Virginia, and then my second in Johannesburg.
Cool.
In South Africa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice to be able to at least return to that same country this time around and have a little bit more of a knowledge of the medical system and how it works.
Yeah. I mean, and especially with so much going on in the US around like Black maternal health too. It's like, it's good to know of a place where I feel comfortable and safe. And like for me, South Africa was a really good option for us. And it's also closer to where we live. But we were in Peru earlier this year, and we were considering delivering there too, and also felt extremely comfortable with the care there too. So we kind of have, I don't know, just our basic services we kind of don't think about going back to the US for at the moment. But again, as the kids age and maybe things change, like we'll have a shift of our orbit. But for now, South Africa is gonna be our place.
That's awesome.
Okay. Amazing. Shifting a little bit back toward the faith conversation. How
Sure.
does that play out in your family now?
Good question.
In as much as you're comfortable.
No, I'm comfortable talking about it, but there's just like no straight lines. So, so my husband is Christian. He's from a Christian background, but I think we're both pretty like liberal in our faith. So I think that's also worth saying, like on the spectrum of, how much we practice either one of us. I think we're, kind of like we go with the flow.
Yeah.
And his mom for a time had also converted to Islam too. And Mozambique, if for folks who don't really know about it, Mozambique has a history of being both like half the country is Muslim, half the country is Christian.
Okay.
It's always been very sort of like open to that mix, but where we live in the capital is more predominantly Christian. So there's a lot more like maybe like more Catholic elements from like the Portuguese colonial heritage, but there's all sorts of Christian communities, and then there's like pockets of Islamic communities too that are also really quite old, many from India and like the Middle East, and sort of have their roots there as well. The north of the country is much more Islamic, but where we are, it's a good mix. So to the extent that we've figured out how to do this, I don't want to lie. We have a 5-year-old. And what we've decided is sort of like each one of us is gonna like expose him in particular, because my little one just turned 4, so she just is along for the ride.
Yeah.
We're gonna expose him to the parts of the culture that we feel like is most important to share at their age, and each of us is responsible for it. So, and I think this gets a little bit into like gender, especially because I feel like when it comes down to like my husband owning Christmas, right? I have to be like, that's your job. If you want them to have Christmas, I need you to get a tree and I need you to order gifts and you got to wrap them. Because I don't want to feel like I have to like perform Christianity for the sake of, this one event for them. Like you have to bring them into it and explain to them why these things are happening and what you want them to know. I'm probably not the best carrier of that message. And then on the other side, we've really just kind of had them, they all have an Islamic name. So that's one part of it that I felt like was really important. Yeah. And then the other part is around mainly Ramadan and Eids, which I feel like, again, are celebrations that I can kind of explain to them, like, why are we doing this? And what does it mean? And they're still too young to actually do a lot of the sort of ritual pieces of it, but the celebration parts, they're all down for that. So we talk a little bit more about why that is. So it's been a little bit, trial and error for the first couple of years, but we're both big champions for each other, though. I think between like me being like, hey, do you want to talk to them about Easter? Like, what do you want to do this year? Like, I will definitely put that on our like family agenda, even if I don't like make it a task for myself. And my husband has been like, so when are we going to start talking to them about like what it means to be Muslim? And I was like, hey, listen, let me have this baby first, then we can talk about it.
Let me get through this.
I'm like, this is a 2024 task, but we do kind of keep each other on track of being like, how do you want to do this? So.
Sure. Yeah. I love that boundary that you're laying just right there of being like, absolutely your thing, babe. Like, these are your children, but I don't do the your thing just because you want that thing to happen. Right. Like, that's cool.
Yeah. It's been interesting. I mean, and again, like you've talked a little bit at the beginning about sort of like the nuclear family conversation versus the extended family conversation. And we both get pressure from the extended family for like me to be the one who like carries the cultures. And I'm like, no, I can do what I'm aware of and what I feel comfortable doing. But he is an adult and a really, really smart human who I married. So I trust that he can carry, parts of this forward that he feels are really important to him. And it'll be way more meaningful to the kids because it has like some connection to dad in a way that I couldn't like, realistically, genuinely say. I would just be kind of faking it too. So, so the external family is a bit of a conversation.
Yeah, let's talk communication strategy about that, because
Sure.
I do feel like that's where a lot of the conversation has come in, particularly mother-in-law. I feel like the most frequent is like, well, my mother-in-law thinks it's really important that whatever, and she's always commenting that we should and I should and why don't I? And my husband's like, well, my mom thinks it's really important. And so obviously we don't spend as much time with dads as we do moms, so we are mostly hearing from them. But it sounds like a lot of women are experiencing something very similar to that, where both sides want her to take on the responsibility for everybody's beliefs.
Yeah.
Yes. So my mom-in-law lives with us right now, which is fantastic. And she's great in many ways. But yes, we do have the like, oh, she just dropped a thought at like the dinner table. What are we going to do with that? I have learned to be okay with pregnant pauses and awkward silences. I think there's a lot of like, I think most women in general, like we feel the need to create the social cohesion around things or to try to like bring peace to a conversation that feels unsettling. And maybe because I'm in comms, I'm just used to being like, that's an interesting idea. Let's go get French fries, right? I think sometimes you have to just like, if that's not a thread I want to pick up, especially not in front of the kids or not at that moment, I kind of just file it away as like, this is something I'm not going to tackle at this moment. Usually that then means I'll go back and have a huddle with my husband and be like, I think your mom said this, like, I don't know what that means, but I think you should dig into it and like maybe that's appropriate. But that's also kind of the way I think Mozambican culture is like it is very passive in a way. Like it's not like somebody's just gonna come to you and be like, you know, where are the Christmas invitations? Like it won't be like that. It'll just sort of be like, what are you guys thinking? And I'll be like, we haven't thought about that yet, but we'll, you know, when the time is right, we will. So maybe sort of gentle conversation in that regard and redirecting has been our best ally. But I think also just reminding her, and I say this to her, I say this is my mom, because my mom also gets into this too, so my mom is not above reproach in this regard. You know, that can be a grandparent thing. Like that is totally fine if that's something you want to do with them. Like I'm okay with that. So there's certain things that we're like, we don't do that as a family because for whatever reason, but there's other things that I'm just like, it would be wonderful if you took them to church, or like if they went to one of the youth things that you're a part of. Like I would love that. I just can't do it, but if you want to, that's fine. So in those opportunities, sometimes I just am like, that would be great. If you feel like you can take that on with them, let me know how I can help it happen. Right. And again, like she doesn't always think like, oh, I could do it. I'm like, yeah, you can. Yes, you can. So I guess that's how I would explain it. But my husband, I would say, also does know when I need him to be proactive in those conversations. And, you know, like if I feel like I'm getting kind of beaten up, like I will be like, what do you think? Or, you know, or I'll be honest with him to say like, I feel a little, you know, like I'm feeling feelings about that conversation. I feel like it was directed at me, but I think there's a lot you can do to make this better for the benefit of our kids and for our family. And he will jump in if he feels like, okay, I get it. But sometimes it does require translation. I will not deny.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
What about, I'm thinking of some families, there's like a worldview clash, or like it goes beyond like the holiday, like we're celebrating this one or that one, where like the two faith ideas are kind of colliding, whether it's between husband and wife or between nuclear family and in-laws. I wonder, do you have any like guidance, or would this all kind of fall into that? Like, that's a very interesting thought. I don't have the same thought. I don't know. I'm thinking of one particular family that I am interacting with at the moment, where I think they were all Mormon, and now one of them is shifting out of that, still in a sphere of believing in God, but no longer aligning with that faith. And it's causing some tensions, but like the marriage relationship is strong, but there is this sense that like, oh no, our worldviews. I think honestly, if I go further, it goes into like a view of eternal life. And if you leave this will affect us forever. And so this is actually like a very severe deeply sad decision you're making, mother of these little children who were all, and so she's trying to navigate like, well, I actually still have faith and I still love you guys and I'm still ready to do an amazing job raising our kids. I just no longer, abide by these certain things. Just wonder if you have any thoughts or insights or encouragement to her who is very likely listening to this episode.
Yeah. First of all, I think I just want to hold space for her because I think, especially as we grow, right, we take on different labels, right? We are an individual first, then we become, parents or moms or, employees or whatever. And we're constantly wearing those labels and what we think those responsibilities mean. And we're often sacrificing who that core individual is over the evolution of that time. So if anything, I just want to honor her as an individual and just say, it is okay to be yourself while you take on all of these other responsibilities for the world and stay true to who you genuinely believe yourself to be. I think for me, I've had the benefit of having so much fluidity in my life that I think I probably have never experienced something such as a rupture. I think most of my family sort of this live and let live as long as it doesn't interrupt anything we're doing. Like we, go with God, it's sort of a free pass on everything that doesn't functionally interrupt what we're doing.
Yeah.
But I think for my experience, we've really just stuck to what are the human behaviors that I'm going to demonstrate that are different for you, right? So in our interaction, how does what I believe change how I'm going to interact with you or how you're going to interact with me? Let's talk about that interaction. How can we make that interaction less less triggering for everybody involved, right? Because the belief systems are different and we could debate that until the cows come home, right? I mean, this is centuries old, right? Wars have been waged over this. We are never going to get to the bottom of the belief piece, but we can get to some space where we talk about how can these interactions be positive for everybody involved, or do we have to just create some limits and some boundaries around which types of interactions we just can't have because they don't hold the same positivity they once did. And that's okay. Maybe that means you have to come up with new spaces of interaction or new ideas around how these events should take place. But yeah, we really just kind of focus on what is the heart of why this particular interaction doesn't feel good? How can we improve that? And let's go slow with each other, right? That's the other thing with family that, I think we often feel like we have to rush to fix it.
Yeah.
And again, I just advocate for you guys have a lifetime to figure this stuff out. Although we don't know how much time we have, that could be a very long time.
Yeah.
There's no need to fix it over, one summer or even 1 year necessarily. It's okay to learn yourself and learn other folks over time until you catch the pace of things. So I think that's what I would offer. In terms of my experience with this, I think the only times it's truly come up are really around gender and gender norms and gender identity, because I think my children are very at least at this age, they seem to be very sort of in their duality of, boy, girl. But I've always just been completely open to whatever sexuality or gender experience they had. And my husband is too. So we're gender neutral, everybody's trying to buy boy things for my son and give him, blue things and soccer balls. And we're great, that's fantastic, as long as you do the same for our daughter. And often that kind of goes back to some sort of a religious conversation at some point. Well, boys and girls are different. And God says, and we're that's great. We would like our children to have similar options in life. And for us, that means that you don't treat them differently just because, whatever you believe their gender norm to be. So we just are asking for fairness. That's all we're kind of asking. And, whatever you believe around that is, it is what it is and we respect it, but that's what we want for our kids. And so that has, of course, created debate around what works and what doesn't. But that's really been the only time I would say I've personally experienced some tense conversations around family and religion, for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, though, to say great. You guys believe what you believe and we'll believe what we believe. Let's talk about the value that I'm expressing here, because I am expressing a very particular human value about how I'd like myself or my children to be treated, and being able to continually peel away from the specifics of like whatever they're bringing or whatever your larger reason for it is, and just coming back to like, but this moment and this interaction, this is the value.
Yeah.
Can we do that? I love that. Going back to the idea of sometimes we're going to have to just create some boundaries around these things. I think a lot of the people that we talk to are often asking for language around that. Like, well, what should I say then when what should I say? Do you have some guidelines or some recommendations for where people can start with the language around like, here's how I say, actually, this is my personal space and this is what I need from you?
Yeah. Oof. I, again, have to say, I think we've created, just because of our lifestyle being so international, there's so many more filters to how things get to our children that we control. So you just, just birthday gifts. Like, this is a thing in my family. Like, they're like, what are you allowing us to send to the children? And I'm like, that's great that I have trained you well. Because, at one point we were like, you can send whatever you want. We're going to give them the things we want them to have, because it comes in the mail and it doesn't arrive on our doorstep, and we get to open it and we'll decide when they get it and if they get it. And we'll tell you if it landed well or if it's coming back returned to sender. But, and so I think at this point, again, like, that's not what everyone can do. So not everybody can just be like, hey, we're not going to open your packages. But for those of you who can, I highly encourage you to do it, because I think it's less about, like, again, religion and all of these other things, and more just about being like, what do I want my kids to even learn about consumerism? Like, what do I want them to know about, like, the world and what can come to and from them, especially when they're little? You can control that. And I think it's important to set the stage for that, because when they are older and they start watching commercials, God forbid, YouTube, like, you can't stop it. So I think if you can practice while they're littler, just being like, let's see how it goes if we only give them one toy, every 2 weeks or once a month, or whatever that pace feels like to you, that you can control how they experience it. I encourage you to experiment. I guess when it comes down to, like, sort of communicating boundaries, that I feel like, things have gotten to my kids before I can jump in the middle. I think there's two parts to it. The first is just, like, again, really just being appreciative of whatever that is. Like, thank you so much for the gesture or for the offer. Like, thank you for thinking of us. Like, I think there is gratitude in everything, because most people are coming to this from a really good place, even if it didn't land as they intended. So showing that gratitude in the moment is important. And then usually in front of the kids, we will not go too deep into it. Again, like, we don't want them to feel like anybody's upset or like rejecting of anything. They're just more of a conversation. And so usually when it comes down to that, it'll be like sort of offline, like, hey, I just want to chat with you about that. Like, thank you so much. But either like that wasn't really age appropriate for them, or like, we just don't feel like we think that that's going to be something that we can carry forward after you walked out of the door. Because I don't know if you've ever gotten, every parent gets this, like, you get the terrible instrument, the thing that makes a bajillion sounds, and you're just like, why did you bring this? Like, why did you think this was a good idea? Like, I'm totally throwing this thing in the trash the minute this kid goes to sleep. But similar things like that can come up, where it's like, hey, this is a responsibility for me as a parent that you didn't really check in with me on. So, like, I just want you to know they're not going to be playing with that thing or reading that book or whatever it is, as you imagined. But we do appreciate the gesture, and like, next time let's just chat, because we don't want you to sort of waste time or money. Like, we want to make sure that you really are in sync with our child, right?
Sure.
And then with the kids, to be honest, I will say, like, my son is 5 now. He often will know, like, Mama, like, I don't know how we got that, or like, I don't know why they said that. Like, I think he already kind of understands the culture of our household. Yeah. So he's sort of like, well, do you want me to do that? Like, is it okay? And so we tend to have like conversations later where we'll just be like, well, what did that make you feel? And, how do you feel about it? And what do you think? And, he's old enough at this point where there's certain times where he's like, oh, I'll do it, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a lot of it's electronics, right? But
Sure.
he's like, okay, well, I'll do that instead of my screen time. Like, I'll do that for this amount of time. And these are the rules, right? And we kind of set the boundaries with him. And so he kind of understands. But, again, I think it's hard for us because our kids are so little and we do gatekeep quite a bit. So to the extent that we can have boundaries, we have quite a bit. But it's harder when people are just, sort of in and out of your kids' lives. And they kind of set the rules, in a way, especially if your kids are spending time at their home or, at their in their space. It can be hard, it can be very hard. So definitely want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, there are some circumstances where there are folks who are in close proximity to their parents and that's their only option for childcare. But it feels important to that grandparent when the child is there to take that opportunity to make sure that the kid knows what they think spiritually. And
right.
This is
right.
Frankly, usually with Christian families is mostly the example here because if that's your belief system, then the stakes are really high. They feel really high.
Anything that has like an eternal consequence.
Yeah.
Right.
So I understand why that feels like a need, but we know some parents who are caught in this kind of like hard place of like, when I send my children there, my parents say these things I don't believe in, but then I need my kids to go somewhere sometimes because this is my only childcare. Would you have advice for that person?
Oh my gosh, that is terrifying. I just want to, number one, I think it's like a blessing and a curse, right? Because if your parents are so willing to spend this much time with your kids, number one, there's so many folks like me that I'm like trying to convince. I'm like, don't you want these kids? Like, can I leave them with you? So I see the blessing in it that, you have grandparents around and they want to be, important fixtures in your children's lives. But, the point of like someone that they love telling them things that are really at cross purposes with things that their parents are saying can be really difficult.
It's actually another way it's coming up a lot in the community is not just religious, it is politics. We get moms who will talk to us like, oh, we sent our kids here and then they came back and they're reporting this, that, and the other. And it's very much the political tension that we feel as adults, but it's getting like directed at the kids. And that can also be a conflicting thing. And so then you're like thankful for childcare, but then also trying to navigate these little tricky interactions with those very big topics of religion and politics.
Yeah. I mean, I think thus far, I mean, again, my kids are little, so I can't speak to this with a whole lot of like gravitas. But I think what for us has been important is just to sort of say afterwards, again, to the adults involved, like, thank you, but no thank you to that part. And if that continues, like we really will have to find another arrangement. And I think with grandparents, I think that hits home in a lot of ways, right? Like they're certainly thinking about their legacy. That's probably why they're like imbibing these children, right? This like future generation with these ideas, because they're like, it's important to them that someone, embody their ideas and thoughts. And I think you don't want to withhold the kids, but I think you have to say sometimes like, I will not be able to send them there if they're coming home with ideas and thoughts that really just are not in line with what we think their age group or whatever is going to serve them right now. And I think that's important to just say, we're not saying that your ideas are wrong or misplaced. Like, I'm not criticizing your ideas. I just think we need to be realistic about how this functions in their lives. And we need to think about them, right? What does it mean for them to walk into a third grade classroom talking about, the politics of America, right? Like that is not where they need to be. That is not important for their like personal development at this moment. And unless it's something that's coming up in class or coming up in their lives that they brought to you as an issue or a concern, we don't want to introduce things that are going to be beyond their either, control, power, responsibility, right? Like we really want our children to be children. And, think even if it goes into sort of this like eternal life, right? That's a big concept for most kids. I mean, we're talking whole books have been written about like at what age should you introduce certain thoughts and what can they process without fear. So I think, educating your parents is a huge part of parenting too, is like sort of saying, hey, things are different from when I was a kid. Here's what we know now. I'm learning. Do you want to learn alongside me? Maybe like this is, we can be partners in the way we think about like training up this child. And that can help. But otherwise, I think you just really have to say like certain things are just in the best interest of my child right now. And I think it's important that you respect that that's how I feel. And it's important that we get on the same page about what we expose them to or don't, right? Just so that they don't feel like there's a tension between our households or us as individuals, because we do love each other and we want them to feel that love across our generations, right? So it's tough. It's tough for sure.
Yeah. That's good though.
That's such a winning way to address that with an adult who you love, who you do want to be on the same side with, rather than coming to a head again, meeting the belief with your own ideas about it, coming into this like under place of like, I know that we actually want the same things for this kid, and inviting them to come along with what you're doing. I think that's sounds like it would be a lot more successful.
Definitely.
I think again, like I again just have done so much thought work around like how much we reparent ourselves in having children. And a lot of times what is really uncomfortable, frankly, is that, we recognize in our child's experience things that we could never address in our childhood with our parents. So we're watching this grandparent do things that we're like, that didn't work when I was 6. Why are you trying this now with my kid? Right. And we're often trying to like break generational legacies with our children and like start new pathways, while our parents are actually trying to like sort of solidify sometimes those same things. And so it can be really difficult in the moment to be like, this means a lot to you, this means a lot to me, but really this is about the two of us. This isn't even about this kid. So we need to figure out like who needs to have this conversation? How do we have this conversation? And again, just think about the best interest of the child, because it's probably not at all about the child.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's so true.
Yeah. And it's really profound if you can dig deep enough to realize that it's actually a lot to do with you and your relationship with the parent, and you and your relationship with yourself when you were a child. Those are big, lofty things to figure out. And often in the heat of the moment, it just feels like it's about your idea and my child. But it's so much beyond all of those things.
Totally. I mean, and I think in the actually really great course that I took is by a I think she identifies as Mexican American mom, Latinx parenting. And I did it mainly because I was going to Peru, and I was like, I feel like my children are going to be exposed to like a lot of ideas around sort of like what it means to be exposed to Latinx culture. And I just want to understand like what I am sort of being exposed to, they're going to be exposed to, and like how I navigate it. And it was that was not really what it was. In reality, the course was really helpful about thinking about, reparenting yourself, and like just uses of control, like uses of controlling language, either, just the ways that we have been sort of taught to understand like control and power, and how we put that on children, and the ways in which we can maybe rethink those types of dynamics now. And a lot of it was around like reparenting. And so I feel like often my conversations, especially with my mom, are just like, I appreciate your parenting style and what it did to benefit me at a time. But I'm going to go in a different direction with my kids. And that's not meant to, discredit or, undermine you or any of the things that you did. It's just that like we're dealing with a different set of circumstances and a different set of kids. And I want to, chart my own path. But anyone who's ever thought about like what their parents are doing with their children as triggering, you are in good company, because I think most of us have felt some sort of attention in the moment.
I was on a call with a woman who's like a mom coach, and she was pointing out that while we are learning to be mothers, the grandmas are learning to be grandmothers, and everybody's learning, and the kind of posture of compassion towards one another would go a really long way versus what you feel is like the defensive, like, no, I'm going to do this and this is my moment and give me space. But I don't know. I found that really to be helpful perspective is like, okay, even if right now what we're experiencing is a conflict of ideas, you're learning and I'm learning, and this kid has never been a kid before. And we've never done this dynamic of all of us being here. Even if it's not the first grandchild, we've never done this dynamic before. Right. And that kind of can bring us back to a place of humility of like, okay, thank you. Great. Thanks. Like, thank you for the love here. I know that that is real. All the other stuff will sort out, maybe not today. And I love your idea of like, maybe not in a summer, maybe not in a year. Mm-hmm. That's so much more doable and like a relief versus, no, we have to figure this out, because you hear a lot like, they're only kids for this amount of time. You only have this many summers. They're going to get older. But like, no, chill out, because we'll figure this out. And actually their experience of their childhood will be more peaceful if we take the time necessary to sort through these hard things that we've never faced before. So I really appreciate everything you're saying. That's so helpful.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of lizard brain happening, right? There's a lot of like, so sorry. Go ahead.
My question that it sort of goes back to in the very beginning, you said like, I could never go back to America. I could never do it the way you guys are doing it. And what I wondered in you talking about how you've been to all of these places and you've experienced motherhood in all of these places and just being a woman in all of these different cultures, what do you make of what we're doing here in America? And like, is there any encouragement you could give? Because I think being a mom here, it's high stress. It's a lot of like, get this right or else. And like, how could you do it any other way than this particular way? Even though that way is very broad and there's many different things going on.
That's also very American to not really even think about, could there be other ways to do this?
Sure. Yeah. And I did live overseas as a newer mom. And then in my childhood also lived in different countries. And I feel like, and I worked in an international nonprofit. So most of my coworkers were from different places. I feel lucky in one sense to have seen different cultures and understand that people do things a bunch of different ways, but you're right in the thick of it about to have another baby. I wonder, what do you make of this, and what encouragement would you give to moms here who would love to benefit from the things you're learning, but maybe don't have the opportunity to go and see it for themselves?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot between how difficult it is to make a living and how much you have to spend time sort of outside of your home and away from your children at really young, early ages to be able to make that happen, all the way through just like the social pressures. They just like never end. They're like constantly mounting, and the element of not having the help, right? Either not feeling like you can ask for it, afford it, or just have it available. So yeah, listen, shout out to American moms. Like, I mean, like, I don't know how you do it. I literally like became a mom and was like, let me be on the first plane anywhere else, because I think I could actually like get more nurturing care for myself and my kids. You know, I could probably talk for days about some of the reasons why I've decided not to really raise my kids in the US at this moment. But just things like being afraid of taking them to school. Like, I just don't think a lot of other places struggle with that. Not that there aren't like elements of issues and, you know, all sorts of fears that you could have. But, you know, we've never had to do a duck and cover drill, right? Like, we just never had to do that at a school. The level of anxiety that I think American moms sort of have to deal with and like function through, in my experience, is extremely high. And most folks don't even know that they're experiencing it. So my gut is to say, get help, right? Like, help, I think, is the biggest part of it. And for a long time, I struggled with it because like just purchasing power in the US and figuring out like, can I afford to have a maid? Can I afford to have, you know, childcare? Like, what does that look like? I really struggled with it. And I think we have in America just a lot of like difficult thoughts around like, what does it mean if you need to pay for help? And I won't even get into the economy of that, but I think the reality of it is you probably need like 10 times more help than you're asking for or have. And I don't know where you're going to get it from, but please put the beacon out there and not try to wear like a superwoman, S on your chest and do it all, because it's just like not feasible. Like I have a lot of friends who are just like, I'm tired all the time. It's like, yeah, girl, no wonder. Like, somebody needs to drop their kids off and bring them home and cook for them. And like, that is work, right? Like that is literally why we have this like housewife, trope, is because it was a job. It was a full on job. And now like we have jobs outside and that same job, right? So like, it's not like we lost one. Like, so you have to kind of think about the ways that you can sort of delegate and try to find opportunities. The only thing that's truly sat well in my heart, I have to say, is just sort of like the economy of helping other women, right? Like there are other times when I'm like, I shouldn't have to pay for this, or like, oh my gosh, my mom did it and other women are doing it. I feel like I should do it too. But the only thing that really sat squarely in my heart was, hey, if I pay somebody to do this, usually it's a woman, usually it's an economy of a woman. So there's another female who's going to be brought into either domestic space or helping. I'm helping that person either get ahead in their financial future or like help their family along. So in my mind, I feel like it is my way of like using my purchasing power to help another woman, even though of course it's in a trade for a service. In the United States, that's the only thought I could have that makes me sleep at night around it. And if that helps someone, great. If not, throw it away. But that's kind of been my thought, is like, if I have to pay a VA or I have to pay whoever, that's okay, because that person is going to use that to feed a child too, or to help an elderly person too, or whatever they're going to do with it is for the good. When I first had my son, I had a lot of issues with, actually it wasn't my son, it was my daughter, with employment, just a lot of just like bristles with like what I was asked to do, how much I was going to get paid, like who controlled my hours. And like, I think that is also a trauma like most American women have to deal with, because we don't have sort of the legal protections that folks in like Australia and Europe and other places actually have around maternity leave and all of that. It's almost like we have this sort of pregnancy penalty, and you get it every single time you have a child. And there's just a lot of relationships that shift too, right? Like your relationship with the institution that you're working for. If you've been a loyal employee and you're like, this is the time in my life where I need to just step off the gas a little bit, and you feel like you're getting punished for that, that can be really difficult to come back to and try to like fight your way to whatever the top is supposed to be. In my experience, I've experienced lots of that. What's really helped me has been entrepreneurship and trying to figure out how I add value outside of that one work title, adding more income, but adding it from a place that, again, of like true value to people who need it and who enjoy it and who are going to benefit from it. And that's actually how I started doing a lot more of this like editorial writing stuff, was because I just felt like the things I was looking for didn't exist, right? Like I'm looking for this like bilingual book with like a brown kid in it. And like nobody's done it. Okay, listen, let's just do it. Like, let's just get over the fact that like it doesn't exist. Let's move on and do it. And little by little, I started to realize, probably like you all did, right? Like there's so many gaps in things that you need as a mom, that there's probably like infinite numbers of jobs you could have that people would pay you for, because at some point, like we all need something that doesn't exist, and it would help you, but it would also serve other people. I don't think I've actually answered your question, but
This is beautiful. I love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I've just found that there's like, you think that you're out here suffering alone in the US, and there's like hundreds, if not thousands of other moms being like, I needed that too, and nobody gave it to me. And so often just, I have like an ideas book of like, oh, I want to do this. I want to try that. And like trying to figure out how I invent it, how I create it, how I produce it has really helped, has helped me. Outside of the US, I think there's a lot of different things that are in place, right? Like extended families are sort of assumed. So very rarely are you going to go to some place and like not have, your aunts and uncles and grandparents like descend upon you to, help either in the pre or postnatal period or just with the child. So again, that's something I think a lot of moms in the US don't have, which, I don't have that here necessarily, but But again, I can afford the help that kind of replaces that sort of extended family. And I mean, there's so many different elements to it. Just being child friendly in cultures. I think there's certain things around like the US where like I go to certain places, I'm like, oh, I really can't bring my kid here, or it's only meant for kids, or, you know, there's just a lot of divisions, and there's a lot of places that are just like super kid friendly. Like they're just like, bring your kid, we don't care. Like, well, you know, somebody will at another table will like grab them and like make sure they eat, and like, you know. So I think especially when they're little, that type of feeling of community can just be not even just good for the kid, but just good for the mom who's like, you know, overextended and just needs a break.
Totally. Yeah. That was great. That was a perfect answer.
I love it. My brain feels so full. I feel that everything, this is sort of how I process as I repeat what you said.
Oh, good.
Like everything that you're saying is so rich in personal power, in like maintaining the power that belongs to you as the mother, both over yourself and over your children. And like really wrapping your arms around that and saying everyone outside of this gets to do it the way that like we've decided, because appropriately my personal power extends over me and these children. And there's a lot of things that come to try and sort of invade that power in the life of a parent, in the life of a woman, in the life of a person. And you just are continuously describing multitude of different ways to say like, nope, we're people and we get to decide what happens to these people and what happens to me, and love you, come along. Yeah. And I just think that's so beautiful. It's so inviting and so warm. And the idea of boundaries or even conflict can feel very cold and very scary. And everything that you're describing is just very communal and has a real invitation at its heart. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I love the way you said that, because that does not sound as neat and as thoughtful like in my life as you described it. But that I appreciate the words that you've given to it, because I think it does come from this place of trying to be heart-centered in everything. And you know, your kids just pick up on every little thing. So I think, you know, having to be in a space where you're willing to repair with them and with others constantly is just a good state to be in, because we're all going to make mistakes and we're all going to have bad days. And if you just come into it being like, that is normal, that is not abnormal at all. That is 100% what's supposed to happen. And we will come back to it and we will correct and we will be fine. We will all be fine. It just feels so good.
That's right.
Yeah.
Should we wrap up by would you like to tell us about the offerings that you bring? So if someone wants to support your entrepreneurship or find out more about you, that they can connect with you?
Yeah, we're going to put all your links in the show notes, but if there's anything in particular that you're excited about.
Yeah.
Sure. Great. So I run an editorial content and strategy company. So we do quite a lot around like building out blogs and building out like all sorts of information. Much of it is around finance. So that's probably why you heard quite a lot of it now. But then there's a bit on motherhood. I have a blog called preggyfinance.com, which really focuses on the personal finance side of like becoming a mom and trying to figure out what that looks like for you. And then for the kiddos, this sort of sparks because we were moving around the world and my husband speaks Portuguese and I speak English, and we also speak Spanish, but couldn't find books in all three or some combo. So I created a self-published book series called Third Culture Kids. So I think you'll put the link there. Third Culture Kiddos. And it centers having Black and brown figures as the protagonists in multilingual spaces, because it can be really difficult to find books that really just are, good night moon, but with, a Black and brown kid in the lead. So that's really the impetus there. But yeah, I'm always looking forward to connecting with other folks. I write quite a bit on Very Well Family and parents and lots of other parenting like blogs and magazines. And I'm always looking for folks with interesting experiences and stories to share. So you can find me on NafeesahAllen.com, and all of my contacts are on there.
Amazing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I feel so nourished and so enriched by this conversation. I just really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
You're so well spoken. And you have kids and it's evening and you're pregnant. There's a lot happening. And the fact that your brain is functioning at the level it is, I admire it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's great to meet you both. And I'm really happy to be able to talk about my experiences and also just to connect with some of your listeners, because it can be a little isolating to be out in places like Mozambique and Peru without other moms to connect with. So I'm really happy to be part of your community.
That was great.
That was great.
That was great.
I told you it was going to be so nourishing, and it was.
Yes. If you want to talk more, join our community, hop on a Zoom call with us. Let's go deep or go home.
Yeah.
Actually, you can go deep from the comfort of your home.
From the
It's
comfort
really
of your-
beautiful.
Go home.
Go home.
Get on Zoom.
Go deep.
We'll go deep.
We'll go deep together. Okay. See you soon. We love
Bye,
you. You're
guys.
doing so good. Bye.